All right, so starting from the beginning. Welcome, Steve Oliff, legendary colorist, legendary talent in the comic industry. Have you won? How many? Have you won some Eisners, haven't you?
I think I won two or three Eisners and a few Harveys too.
There you go. There you go. I don't count those Harveys, but anyway. Uh,
Oh,
well, um, anyway, so we're going to do a little bit of a history of things. I'm going to hand over to Steve. We're going to bounce back and forth and stuff. I'm showing you what I have on screen right now in Photoshop is, and there were several flavors of these things printed around. And the valuable part of this was, remember how all you guys sometimes talk about, oh, my computer is not properly calibrated or whatever the deal. That was a much bigger problem back in the old days, that's for sure. Our old CRT monitors were nowhere near as accurate as these modern monitors are. So what we would have, and I don't forgot who was the first person to kind of, someone did this in a book too. I think we used to do this in Image because we used to do several paper stocks. So when you're doing a print run on a comic, you usually have an extra sort of gatefold or extra. You could put some extra paper on the press, and we would get color targets like this done on the different paper stocks we were printing on, and on a relatively similar press, because each press kind of had their own fingerprint, really. And back in the old days when we used to print a whole bunch of comics, there used to be multiple press checks that went on as comics went. That doesn't happen anymore. But anyway, the relevance of this is you could go, okay, I know if I'm going to do a 50% blue and then with a 10% black, that's really what it's going to look like. Yeah. That was very
much more modern one than the old ones. They used to just have. We didn't get to use blacks or anything like that initially.
Yeah. Yeah, that's because it tended to darken up the page, right? That's why they, especially in the old days, used to really stay away from K in any color.
The old days they just didn't allow you to have it. You just got 25, 50, and 100% of your cyan, magenta, and yellow. And then later they added a 75%.
And who is the they?
The first time I noticed a 75% was with Eclipse Comics.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if anybody else had done it, but prior to that.
Yeah. But anyway, this was very, very valuable to have around back in the old days. I'm pulling up here a page from Shattered. And Shattered was that. Now Shattered was the thing about Shattered is the whole thing was digital, right? It wasn't necessarily done before you did any Akira stuff. It was just one of the first all digital comics, right? Am I right?
Well, it was all digital as far as the line art.
Yeah.
But the early Macintoshes didn't have any color capabilities, so they had to use blue lines.
Oh, so it was hand color. So it was digital for the black and white, the first digital black and white book, but then it was colored traditionally.
Right.
Right.
Well, actually, not traditionally. It was blue line, which no one was doing at the time.
Explain blue line to the kids.
Blue line is a thing I think that was developed in Europe, where they would take the black and white line art and then they would print it in a non-photo blue on a decent kind of paper, either an art board or some kind of illustration board. And then what you would do is that the artist would paint on and whatever they would use on the artboard, and then they would have an acetate overlay for the black plate, and then they would shoot the colors separately and then merge them together at the printing process.
Right. And if you look at if you guys are familiar with Ginger Rod's work, Mobius's work, you can see a lot of that in some of his fine stuff, because you actually still see, because it's still not perfect registration, and you'll see like a little bit of the blue line mirror out from the black line, because it's actually, they made kind of a sandwich out of it when they shot it for color separation.
And that was always one of the problems with blue line and then later the gray lines, is that sometimes the paper and the acetate wouldn't, well, the paper would shrink or the acetate would shrink, and then it would lose proper registration.
Right, right. Okay, so there we go. Again, we're going through a little bit of history here. Corbin.
Aha.
And Richard Corbin was one of the, again, there were colorists, and then the mechanical process to get it separated were separators back in the day. And wasn't Richard Corbin one of the first guys to really separate his own stuff?
As far as I know, he was the first real colorist slash separator because he bought his own copy camera. So he was able to do his own separations where no one else had that capability.
If you haven't seen Richard Corbin's work, you should definitely look into it, guys. Especially his early color work was pretty cool. Creepy and eerie. There was some really cool stuff in there. Really kind of.
Example is from.
What was that?
This example is from one of the creepy and eerie stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he also did some beautiful stuff, actually on his den.
Yep.
Originally, the underground stuff, and then the first place I saw it printed really well was over in Metal Hurlant, over in Europe. They made a really beautiful printing of it.
Yes. Close that. I have actually, if we're talking about old stuff, this is a 1989 comic book page that I did on an Amiga.
Oh, really? Was that just a test page, or was that for print?
No, that was a test page trying to get work, taking it down to San Diego, and I remember people saying, it looks like it's colored with a spray can. I go, you don't understand, this is all colored on a computer, and like, yeah, it doesn't matter.
Brian, someday I might embarrass you with this first colored page of proof that you gave to me at some convention. Oh, it's really interesting to see how far you took it. Oh, there we go.
Now, this, when I first got my first job coloring, this is what was handed to me, the style that they wanted me to match. This is Mark Silvestri. This is a Mark Silvestri Rip Claw. It was a big poster that Steve and his guys did. And they said, okay, I want you to match this style. And I'm like, okay, but it's got like all these kind of bands in it. And I came from, that's the way we had to do it back in the day when we didn't have millions of colors,
Well, because our software was completely different than Photoshop. For all you students, Photoshop, I used to give this analogy that our old software was like a 3-speed Jeep, 3 speeds forward and 1 in reverse, whereas Photoshop is like a 12-speed Ferrari. It can do so much more.
But again, but this it did definitely have a style, and this became the dominant coloring style. This whole like sort of it's a vector based system, so it's not a system.
And Brian, you should stress that point for them that was one of the reasons that our stuff was different, because it was vector based as opposed to the bitmap, which is what Photoshop is all about.
Yeah. So and the main reason for that, guys, was that okay? So when did you have your first systems up and running, Steve?
The first system arrived in December of '88 when it was with my first, just about to start on Akira.
And that was probably 286, maybe?
Yes, it was. It was a 286.
Okay.
It was a 286 with, I think it had 1 or 2 megabytes of RAM, and it had a 40 megabyte hard drive.
Woohoo!
And I have some examples to show you of some of what it looked like.
All right, let's switch screens then. But the point, guys, is the reason why things were vector based back then was because the computers weren't powerful enough to do an 11 by 17 400 DPI full color page. Especially no way an IBM 286 would be. I just shared the screen over to you, Steve.
Okay, so let's see. So this was one of our machines. This one, I'm not sure. This is one of my main computer guys. Is Kiko Taganashi, and he's working on Akira. And we had to have 2 screens. One would we do all our calculation. I mean, all our DOS stuff, because it was basically just pure DOS, and then we would work on the screen there, and we didn't have anything big, just the old 5 1/4 floppy inch drives. And basically, one thing about the vector files is, so they were so small that we could put almost an entire 22-page comic book on one 5 1/4 inch floppy disk. But the line art couldn't be turned into a vector, so we had to have a separate disk for each of the line arts of the page. And so we shipped a lot of disks back and forth. Let me see if I can find you.
The vectors are so much lighter. For example, so when I first started in comics, to really move around, and we were stupid because we didn't know that we didn't have to color a page at full resolution when I first started doing Photoshop. So we were coloring these big files, and Photoshop wasn't as able to handle files. Like, I mean, when we first started, it was Photoshop 3. I mean 3, okay. Not CS3, 3. And it had no layers. So you put the line art in a channel when you were coloring with it. And you had to have a computer that cost about $10,000 to do it efficiently, to have enough power.
Because you really needed lots of RAM. And RAM back in those days used to cost, it was $50 a megabyte. So and if you needed a bunch of megabytes, your cost of your computer went way up.
Yeah. And you couldn't even do it on an IBM at the time. I tried that those full res pages, but what I didn't realize at the time, and we still probably could have pulled it off, was color is much more pliable. You want to keep the line art, like even Steve was saying with the vector here, you want to keep the line art pristine, but you can color at a lower resolution and bump it up. And that's what we didn't realize until, we finally wised up to it, that we could color at half the resolution that we would normally have the line art at, and then just blow up the color at the end of the day and slap that high-res line back on it. But anyway, Steve, continue.
Well, I want to show you this is a close-up of the screen. This was our basic file edit, trace, polygon, screen, blends, and we had as far as our blends going, we had top to bottom, right to left, and then an angle blend, and then a radial blend. And that's why you see a lot of those cut colors. What we'd have to do is we'd have to pick our colors and then try to blend from one color and make it kind of blend into whatever the color was underneath. And because of a lot of things, it wouldn't necessarily work out right. So that cut color look sort of happened. And what's going on this screen is this is a page. This is from Akira #1, and all of this, which looks like skyscrapers, is not skyscrapers. It was a glitch, and it would freeze up and do this thing, and it got so bad that the way we would color it, I mean, what you call now a selection, we would call a polygon, because this was all done with a mouse too. There was no Wacom tablets or anything nice like that. But this computer was so buggy, and it would overheat so much that it got so, for the first issue of Akira, I had to save after every single polygon if I didn't want to lose all the work that I put into a page. and this is one of the ones that had frozen up and glitched out on me, so I put it up there.
It looks great, though. It does look like a city.
It looks like there's skyscrapers in the background, but the sky was supposed to be dark.
That's a filter you could sell, Steve.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's see, what have I got here? I want to take you back a little bit farther than this, because my career started in doing full color on the Incredible Hulk magazine, but I saw that the comic books, that I got into computers with an Atari 800, and I just saw that it had 256 colors, and it had no printing capabilities. You couldn't save it or do anything, but you could kind of sort of draw with it. So I started I started seeing the potential of computers for this stuff. But nothing was available from about early 80s till, let's say, 85, 86. And there was this Time Arts Lumina software. And this is an example of I hired these guys in Santa Rosa to scan in, and I hired a guy at, I forget, $75 an hour to make this image to take back to show Jim Shooter the potential for computers in comics.
Jim Shooter was the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics way back when.
Right. And so I spent $450 to make this slide and showed him, like, look, I think it can work, Jim. And I got back there and he goes, nah, computers, comics never work. And then so I kind of gave up for a while until this other software came along. And there's an interesting story. So I'm kind of glad that you pulled up Mike Sainz earlier. But Mike Sainz did the Iron Man graphic novel using a Macintosh, but he had been originally scheduled to use the software that we used for Akira. But he was a Macintosh guy, and our software was all PC. So at the last minute, a buddy of his had developed some color software, and he abandoned the guy who he was going to have do the color separations and stuff for it. So the guy, Kenny Giordano, didn't have anybody who had any work, and I met him, and when I got a job to do Akira, I suggested to Marvel, hey, you want to try doing computers? And they said, oh, we don't care how you do it as long as it meets our price point. And so that's it's because of Mike Sainz ditching him is that I got to work with computers, and Akira happened. Well, I mean, we can turn it back over to you now if you want, unless you want to just show. I mean, because I've got some.
Show me some stuff. Show us some stuff.
Okay, well, let's see. These are just. I'll show you some color guides in a minute, but I've got a couple of files here that I was able to translate. Let's see, from the Eric Larson's Savage Dragon, and these. Okay,
so now,
let's see.
Now, Steve, just because I get confused a little bit. So the Cod Barrett was the software system for it, but there was Tint Prep and is this all one thing?
They were all. What it was originally it was called Pixelcraft and Tint Prep, and actually it was called Kaleidoscope, and then through a weird sort of way, Cod Barrett came in, invested some money into the system, and got the rights to it, and sort of screwed Kenny Giordano out of his own software. And his software had been written by his 17-year-old son in a very quirky way. So when Cod Barrett got it, they couldn't really upgrade the software without rewriting the entire code. And so it caused them a real bit of problem with being able to do. This is an early cover. This is the Savage Dragon #6. I just sort of randomly opened some of these pages because they're kind of old and slow, but you can see if I zoom in all the cuts and how we would kind of interweave it, and then in the printing process a little bit of the colors would kind of mix and match. You see down here where you get that, we'd put the highlight and then a little mid-tone and then go to the dark, and then some colors work better than others. Like I think that this purple with the blue sidelight kind of works well for that.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. I'll open. There was one that I saw that I kind of really liked over here. If I can find it. Not that one. Not that one. No. And then what happened with Oli Optics is that we started evolving our whole look, because I happen to have a very good.
That's the name of Steve's coloring company, Oli Optics. Right.
And you see, here's one of the ones where we started to get it down a little bit better. We were really trying to get the highlights, and then the kind of the hot greens, and then the minty greens. And what we'd try to set things up, with these dark, these kind of gradations in the background, and then work toward. Here you can see all the cuts. See, and then you see there's a radial gradation, so we could do like a hot spot of your light, and then it would hit and work sometimes. And then here it worked very smoothly. Here it worked pretty rough. So it's kind of hit and miss.
Yeah, you can really see the bands of from the radio there.
Yeah, and then and then
Yeah.
sometimes we just did some kind of rather sloppy cuts, but it would all depend on the separator's skill.
But sometimes that really, I mean, again, what was interesting about it is it kind of forced you guys into a style, and I think the style
Right.
worked, you know, because
Yeah, it did.
it was kind of somewhere in between, sort of almost an anime kind of, style, but it was like more shapes, more cuts than they could actually do too at the time,
Right, and that was exactly that's what kind of made us unique in the industry for a little while. There was before you guys started, since all the image guys started getting their own color separation units. We were separating 60% of the image line.
Yep.
Actually, I'm gonna go to try to find this one. Joe, if you can talk about Joe Chido maybe for a second while I find this one I'm looking for.
Well, I had lunch with Joe today. He said hi, by the way, Steve.
Oh, thanks. Cool.
Let's see. Let me switch real quick. I'll switch screens again.
And I'll just try to.
Okay, share. Alrighty. Let's go back to Photoshop. Yeah, so you can see some of that stuff. Let me pull over something else again if we're talking about some of the history of this stuff. Yeah, I've already shown them some Joe Chido guys. But remember we were talking about just a second ago about the blue line. So this is a Mobius painted image that I have here, and you can see perfectly down here.
Oh yeah.
The blue line doesn't quite match up with the black line, and how you have these gaps over here too. Now, in our day, we would try and fix that with if it was all digital, it'd be trapping. But in this time, nope. But it's pretty cool. Have you ever seen? I don't think I've seen some of his original stuff before. What did he use to color, Steve? Do you know? Was he mostly a gouache guy?
I think it was gouache, as far as I can tell.
Here it is without the. There you go. That's pretty cool. So that's an example of what it would be like painting over it.
Yeah, and just for the record, Mobius was one of my big influences on color. Richard Corbin, Mobius, Vaughn Bodie.
Yeah.
Those were the guys. Okay, come on now. I just had these things.
I mean, you used to. So if we're talking about your guides, Steve, you did a certain amount of guides that were which were the guides that you would get that have the acetate overlay with the black line?
Oh,
was that
well,
was
I mean,
that wasn't all the guides at a certain point, right? Was that?
No, what there was before the computers came along. We were trying to do. We would color full color onto photostats, and then they would shoot just off of that, and that worked for a while. And then the blue lines came about, and when Lynn Varley did Dark Knight, and then DC started printing a bunch of the blue line books, and then Eclipse had put up these gray lines, which were like coloring onto a photostat, and it would have the same overlay thing as a blue line, but it was a printed version of the line art on a photostat at 10% black, and then they printed them small so that they could gang them up on a drum press, and it was cheaper. Okay.
And when you were doing most of your guides, weren't you more of a watercolor guy, or were you a dyes? I can't remember.
I used felt pens and airbrush, and well, I mean, on blue lines I used everything: Pantone films, colored pencil, stuff, but mostly on the if it was a photostat, I used mostly water-soluble felt markers. Okay. Well, I found one. Let me see if I can. I'll load a couple of things up. and it just will come back.
Should we switch back to you, Steve?
Not yet, not yet.
Okay, not yet.
Almost.
All right.
I want to have a couple so I can.
Do you have any of the like this is a nice Tumblr page of a bunch of Steve's stuff. Now, the book that I was always thought that was cool, Steve, and I doubt you have any of the crazy guides. 'Cause I remember you showing me some of the guides for the Maxx that were like just had all kinds of stuff on them.
Yes. I have some of those, but a lot of the Maxx stuff, it was Sam would.
Wait, so stop for 1 second, Steve. So, are you guys? If you guys have not seen Sam Keith's The Maxx, you guys have to go and look for this book. If you guys want to do comics, this thing will blow you away if you've never seen it before. There also was a awesome MTV animated show, The Maxx, which was just really, really cool. It was basically like the comic come to life. But anyway, keep going, Steve. I'm sorry.
Just a little sidebar on the Maxx. That was my very first television credit because I went down to Rough Draft where they were doing it, and turns out that they were actually opening up the comic book and then translating the thing in Photoshop onto the screen. And Sam felt that I deserved a color coordinator credit for that.
No, nice.
That was very kind of. Oh yeah,
That's
this is
some of your
cool.
stuff, Steve.
Yeah, that was one of my last issues of Sandman. But so when you want to switch back over, I've got a very cool
I'm ready
thing to show you.
Switch back over to you. Let me, whoops, share, hang on. Let me change presenter to Steve. Yes.
Okay, here we go. So this is a Joe Chido color guide.
You shared your screen, Steve?
I thought I did. Where do I have to?
Oh, no, hang on. It was me. Hang on, I screwed up. There you go. There you go.
But that's Joe doing his pit thing.
I still don't see it. Do you guys see Steve's screen, guys?
Oh, yeah. Okay,
I'm zooming in on the pit face.
You guys see it? Okay. I must be covering something with my screen then. Oh, there we go. I see
Is
it.
everything okay?
Yeah, I got it.
Now, and then Joe just did beautiful lighting. And he just did really cool guides.
Yeah. Yeah, Joe Chido
kind of
would do a lot of, so he'd marker and then a lot of colored pencil over the top too.
Oh, okay. So this was I guess I bought this guide from Joe, or I somehow ended up with it. But then this is an example of the color separation. This was our printer proof. For the first 11 issues of Akira, I didn't have any printer proofs at all. The only proof I ever got was when the issue came back to me in the printed form. But we finally got a thing called the Mitsubishi G650 wax transfer printer. And it really, if it looked good on the G650, we knew that it would print well because it was calibrated to the CMYK that the printers were using. And if I can zoom in a little bit so you can see all the rosettes and everything. But I thought this was a pretty good example of how we and this separation was done by one of my best later separators, a man named Quinn Suplee.
Go ahead and go in even closer, Steve, so they can see that dot pattern again.
Sure. And then look, he even put little kind of stars in his eyes and stuff. But yeah, you can see all the rosettes with all the down here and how all the colors blend.
There used to be a lot of dots in old comic books in the printing process, and I actually kind of miss that a little bit when I look back at some older stuff. I think there's something about those dots that make the eye kind of fool it into more detail or something. I don't know. Something that's pleasing to the eye. I don't know why.
But this is one of the things that came out of the image era. There's a lot of double lighting stuff.
Yes.
That we started on Akira, and then by the time Spawn and Cyberforce and Jim Lee stuff came along, there was a lot of really cool lighting effects, and I thought this was a pretty good example of that.
This was the guys. What he's showing is an actual print off that old wax printer. So that's why you're seeing those dots. But those dots, depending on who printed it, you'd have dots back then too.
You would, but it'd be a little more subtle
Yeah.
in the print than it was in our printer proofs.
Yeah.
So okay, I can go back to you unless you want to see some color guides or something.
Yeah. Show us some guides.
All right. Now I found the right folder. How about, let's go to, what do we got? Avengers Forever.
More script stuff, Steve.
Well, I'll show you that in a second. Alan Moore actually draws for lots of his scripts.
Yeah, do you actually have some of those layouts? I've been dying for one. I used to have a whole all his thumbnails for Wildcats Spawn, I think it was, that Scotty.
Oh, okay.
But
yeah.
I think my wife threw them away. I can't.
Oh no!
But if you have some of that stuff, I'd love to get my hands on. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Sure. Well, I'll show you what I've got. This is just a guide, done with gouache, and felt pens and markers on Carlos Pacheco's stuff. But we didn't separate this. This was in my later career, before in the color guide era. I was working a lot for Marvel. I did hundreds of pages for them, and just doing guides, and other people were doing the separations.
Yeah.
But here, I'll show you.
Again, to go back to that, Steve. So prior to when you guys started doing separations, how were they done?
Okay, well, all right. How it worked since pretty much the beginning of comics was that they would give you a copy of your artwork, then you'd use Dr. Martin's dyes, and then write those codes like that he showed you at the beginning, and then it would go to a color separation house, usually Chemical Color up in Connecticut, what we used to call the little old ladies, and they would use ruby lith and or cut colors, whatever they did, and create a color separation based on your color guide. Now, what you said like about Corbin was one of the first guys who was the colorist and the color guide artist. And when I started doing Akira, I found out that the color guide artist works in editorial, which is where the editor, the writers, the pencilers, the inkers, the letters, they all are part of, and the colorists are part of editorial. But color separation is part of manufacturing. So they were pretty much always separated. I mean, literally, they were like at Marvel, the editorial offices were on one floor, and then you go downstairs a floor, then you went to the manufacturing department. And so often there was not good communication between those two. So I think in the modern era, Ole Optics and me were the first colorist that was also the color separator.
Mm.
But anyway, this is some of Alan Moore's things for the Spawn issue where he goes to hell. I think it's in the 7 layers of hell.
Oh, you gotta send me these, Steve, when you get a chance.
I'd be happy to. Yeah, but Alan Moore, he just draws it all out, just lets you know what it was. But I thought that was one of the coolest scripts that I'd received.
Yeah, you guys, that is something, again, for all you guys that really are wanting to do sequential stuff. Even if you're not like the best artist in the world to at this stage, you're getting better. It's like breaking it down like that is really, really important. And there's a lot of great writers who, like, let's say Brian Bendis and hey, one of my old students at MCAD, Jonathan Hickman. would draw the thumbnails of stuff like that. But eventually, you know, the guys who are, you know, they're obviously better writer than they are artists. They kind of go, okay, the other way around. But that's a great way to map out your stories. And this is also a great way, if you are beginning to do sequential, to kind of, because you're not sure, like, okay, what can fit on a page? You know, can this all fit on a page? You know, you start thumbnailing things out, and you can kind of see what can fit on a page and what can't fit on a page. Anyway, that's awesome.
Yeah, and it was really interesting to see how Todd interpreted what Alan had given him to work with.
Oh yeah, I'm going to put this whole thing together. I'll get I'm pretty sure I can get that original line art too, and that'd be an awesome little package. I'm doing a new site that will have a whole bunch of teaching stuff on it, and this would be
cool.
a great thing to have as well. You know, I have a nice Miracle Man script with layouts and stuff from Total Brin and the whole 9 yards, and Alan's full script on it too. But yeah, this is great. What else you got, Steve? What else?
All right, well, let's see. Let me go back to take a look here. Oh, this.
Yeah. Show us an Akira. It shows
some Akira. This was from one of my favorite issues of Akira, Akira 32. We had my crew was at their peak of perfection. It was before I had lost anybody. Kiko was still working there, and Abel and everybody was still happening. And so what really made Akira kind of special was that we just did these full color guides. I mean, that were fully painted. I mean, these are almost, you know, they're not quite good enough that you could print from, but sometimes they look so much better than the actual printed version. Oh yeah, this is one. Just on telling Brian that this sequence in Akira called this thing the Blorping Baby. It's when Tetsuo just turns into this giant weird creature. But these were really fun. And the motto at Oli Optics was, the better you draw, the better we color. And so this was, with Akira, Otomo is just such a good artist that it really made a difference.
Steve, explain so what was so this was a Xerox then on what kind of paper that you would use what to color it?
Okay, sure. What this was a slightly oversized Japanese paper, very, very good. Not like a cheap paper in the Xerox from, you know, here. And they sent me a bunch of copies so I could make mistakes on it. But this paper was good enough that I could use airbrush, felt pens, colored pencil, gouache. It was actually, a gouache is opaque watercolor, which if you're a painter at all, I love gouache because it's much easier to use than regular watercolor. But this would hold up almost as good as a good blue line artboard, you know. And this is what we just recently had a sale of these through Felix Comic Art.
Was this kind of like so was it kind of like a 2-ply Bristol? Was it that thick or not quite that thick?
It's a little thinner than that, but it's a really nice kind of a plate surface, but not with just enough tooth that you could do just about anything with it. Let's see. Oh, there's a couple. Oh, this is another version which you had showed them about the different things with color. This was a gray line from Eclipse Comics. This was one that I was working. This is where we were working on this, a Ron Randall cover. I could use airbrush, just about anything I wanted on this. So, but this was the finished cover. This was your line art, and then this is your color underneath. And on this, on these photostats, I could use airbrush and use Frisket so I could make clean cut areas. So I would just put the Frisket down, pull it up, because like on a regular Xerox or even on the Akira paper, if I tried to use Frisket on it, it would tend to shred the paper. But on a photostat, you could get a clean, nice line. So that's basically, and what this old gray line system was all about was that we were actually doing the color, and then they would shoot from. It's basically, now I thought about it, you know, we were doing the color separation, and then not just the coloring,
Right.
not color guide.
Now, when you were working on something like this, Steve, would you, because though now, guys, just imagine, so this is down on his table, and that there's a acetate sheet with the black line that's taped to the top of this, correct?
Yes.
And then, you know, then how often would you find yourself flipping back and forth with that thing on? Or were you really getting to a certain point where you were like, I can do it without that, and then at the end I'm going to check it?
Nope. I would flip back and forth all the time, because there are lots of times you'd have to check your lines, because as soon as you start putting color down, you started obscuring all of your lines. So it was easy to get lost.
Right. That's very cool.
Yeah.
So how many? I mean, so what percentage of how many years were you then mostly doing gray and blue line stuff? I mean, was that a chunk of stuff, or?
It's gray lines and blue lines started in about 82. I mean, and till 88, 89 when I started doing Akira. And even then I was still doing a little bit of blue line stuff here and there, even though we were already working on Akira for a couple of years. But what was interesting is that my first job in comic books really was, well, I went back to New York and worked with Howard Chaykin on The Star's My Destination. And we finished it because Howard's a slightly colorblind artist, and he needed some color help. And so I worked with him and lived in his mom's spare bedroom out in Queens and worked with him in Manhattan. And then when the job was done, he took me up to DC, which had no use for a full color because no one was doing any full color. And that was what I was specializing in. And then I went to Marvel, and they happened to have the Hulk magazine, which had just switched to full color because of the success of the Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno Hulk TV show. And so my first real coloring job was using this system that Ralph Macchio, along with Rick Marshall, had come up with, where I called it the double print black system, and they called it Marvel Super Color. But what you do is supposedly these photostats would not shrink. So I would color on one and then do effects work on the black plate. It wasn't an overlay. There were two separate things, so it did basically full color on the one. And so anyway, Bill Sienkiewicz's very first Moon Knight story was my first major job for Marvel. And then I got the job of coloring the Hulk, and I was able to come home to California and started working remotely. I didn't have to live in New York, which was kind of fun. But that started a little bit of the full color stuff, but that was the only book being done in full color at the time, in America anyway.
Well, and most of the time too, guys, back in the day, we used to, and I'm sure you must have had tons of piles of FedEx 11 by 17 boxes of things.
Oh, tons.
You guys, I mean, it was always because scanners used to be, 11 by 17 scanner used to cost thousands of dollars. So
$5,000 at least.
Yeah, so you got original art on your doorstep every morning if you were a professional colorist coloring a bunch of books, that's for sure. You know, I have a shot somewhere of my boy who's 22 now, but when he was a little baby, surrounded by about 20 FedEx boxes that we had from just like the week before, probably.
It got pretty hectic. I remember FedEx guys got to be regular friends there, man. On Friday, man, we'd be shipping stuff out up to Uncle Kenny, up at Spawn Land, and off to every place else. You know, but the reason that I was able to work remotely back in 1978 on the Hulk was that this brand new thing way before FedEx, it had just come out, called Express Mail, and it was second day service. So I could actually meet deadlines and not have to live in the New York area. Because colorists, okay, one thing about being a colorist, you're always last in line. And so if the writer messes up a day or two on the deadline, the inker and penciler mess up the letter, who gets squeezed? The colorist. So you're always, in the past, the colorist always had to be within the New York metro area so that they could courier their work in at the last minute, or they could just take the train and take it into the office. But you know, once with the express mail came out, and then later FedEx, you could live anywhere, and it made really nice to be able to make New York money, but live out here in the country in California.
But it was also funny because we had that worked out, but then we would also in the early days. So now they were different because they did the Cod Barrett system, so their files weren't that big. When we were in Photoshop, our files were huge that we had to get up to printers. And imagine back then when we only had modems, right? So it would take hours and hours and hours and hours to upload it, and half the time they would be corrupt in some way, shape, or form. I remember when I was doing Spawn and to go to Uncle Ketty, we had the first ISDN line, which was basically the equivalent of 2 phone line mod modems. So it was like 128 baud rate or something like that, which was still really slow. But it's interesting to think about the limitations that you guys don't have now. I mean, you could dump 20 megs as an email attachment, no problem. For us, that was a problem. When we would often too, back in the day, when books sold a lot, like 500,000 copies or something, if the comic book market is a non-returnable market, so if you so whatever they order from you, they're stuck with if they can't sell it. If you're late with a book, it becomes returnable, with my air quotes going that you can't see. And that means they can return them, and those you lose potentially at 500,000 copies, you could lose $100,000. And we would sometimes, when we were close enough on a deadline, someone would grab a SideQuest drive, which were the old removable drives, hop on a plane to Canada, because that's where most of the books were being printed back then, at a place called Quebec, and fly up there because there was that much money involved.
Wow, that's amazing. I'd never heard that, but you guys were on a, you know, that was one of the reasons why that well, Todd initially on Spawn gave us a bonus, a substantial bonus instead of a royalty if we got the job in on time. And so my guys, everyone knew we had to get it in on time. And then some of the other image guys were not quite so diligent about their deadlines as Todd was, because Todd, one thing about him, he understands that the most important thing about comic readership really is consistency, so that the fan knows that they're going to get their comic book at such and such a date or pretty close to it every month, so they develop a reliability factor. And Todd saw that was why his books were consistently good sellers, you know. And sometimes if the guys, you know, Rob Liefeld in particular would be like a guy who would sell millions of copies, but he wouldn't get his next issue out, and that, I think, hurt him eventually, whereas Todd was just strict about his deadlines. And another guy who was really good about that and understood that was Sam Keith on the Maxx.
Yeah. So this is a Spawn Batman guide?
Yes, it is. Yeah, you can take it back up to your place. I've just been kind of wandering around looking at.
I think we want to see some more of your stuff.
All right, well, let's see. I've
been teaching all semester. They've seen a bunch of my stuff. They don't need any.
Okay. This one's kind of fun. And just to let your people know that I've been doing a thing kind of irregularly on Facebook, because I don't really have any other place. I'm just going to let everybody know, even though I was a pioneer in the technology of computer coloring, I'm not very technologically literate. I mean, I'm not very good with Facebook. I don't have Instagram accounts. I wish I did, but so I've been using Facebook in lieu of a blog to do this thing I'm calling Under the Line Art, where I'm just calling up things like this, which is a color guide for a Joe Quesada thing we did for Batman, you know, and just kind of talking about the stories, because what I realized is my career spanned a real transition time in comic coloring. And so there's a lot of things in each one of them. I started thinking about it like, it's like not only just a book, it's also like a geological layer of comic history. And then there's the inside story of the communications, because I've been running across all these notes and stuff from people, and it's bringing back lots of memories. So I've been sharing it with people. It's been kind of fun. So this is one that I posted not too long ago.
Hey, you want to zoom in a little closer on that, Steve?
I can. I'll go for the Joker's face first.
Okay.
And then you can see the texture on this. This was mostly done with felt pen, and the felt pen would always give you more texture, and whereas the gouache would give you a cleaner, smoother color.
But the gouache would go. I mean, but you usually only use the gouache when you have the overlay, right? Because the gouache you're gonna obliterate your black line.
Well, but I knew that this was just a guide, so you can see if you look right in here where there's a little bit of paint. I've used gouache on this wall. I mean, a combination of gouache, because it has covered up. You know, it sort of opaques out the stuff. So I would have to just be careful.
Yeah.
Really, that's really what it came down to. And see here, I'm a little sloppy up there going over it, but I knew that it was just a guide, and that on the computer it wasn't going to show up at all like that.
Right. More and more. Show us more.
Okay, I'm just looking for something else here.
You don't have any samples of that thing you were talking about with the Marvel Super Color stuff, do you? I'm interested in seeing that layer with the special effects. I can't quite envision it.
Well, it was just a black plate. When I say special effects, I haven't scanned those in yet.
Okay.
You know, but I've been digging through them. What they were, do paint. I also used in those days cell vinyl animation paints, because they would stick well to the plastic. Because a lot of people had trouble working on photostats because they tried to use alcohol markers and different things, and that doesn't work. You have to use water-soluble things. And I would take the water-soluble felt markers and then use Q-tips to blend the colors, and just sort of, you could kind of rub it and it would do all these different things. But what I would do, I would have to, on the color plate, I would have to white out all of the lettering, because you didn't want a ghosting effect on that. But then on the black plate, I could knock out some parts of line art if I wanted a transparency effect, to make like looking through a window, and then all you would have, you'd have no black plate there, and it would just be the composite color, the CMY and a little bit of K-tone, that would give you sort of a muted image. And then to achieve certain different darker colors, I would actually add zipatone to the stuff. Now,
do you guys have any questions for Steve? You can keep going, Steve, and I'll just interject as I see something.
Okay. Let me see. Here's another one from color guides from. Oh, and one of the after Oleoptics kind of wound down, I had a bunch of different people spin off, and then went off and formed their own companies. You know, Kiko went off to work for Rob Liefeld. Abel and Ruben started iHawk and started working for Eric Larson. Quinn went off to everybody kind of split, and I just sort of limped along for a while, and then just had the Maxx, and then the Maxx kind of petered out, and I was looking, what do I do? So I called up my old buddy Ralph Macchio, who was still an editor at Marvel, and he happened to have some color guide work. So I started doing color guides for the new modern era of computer coloring, because by this time Photoshop had taken off. Malibu had sold their comic book coloring systems, or Marvel had bought Malibu, and then Malibu sold it to Graphic Color Works in Ireland. So there were a lot of people doing color separations, Digital Chameleon and stuff. But I was actually afraid to get into Photoshop, because I was so rooted in my old way of doing things that I waited a long time before I embraced Photoshop, and kind of foolishly, but that's so be it. But for a while, I was just doing color guides for Marvel. And in the digital era, they added the lettering later. So I didn't have to worry about coloring around word balloons and doing all that. So I was able to really try to make the color guides much more interesting. Now, most of them, the separations that came out of these don't look nearly as nice as the color guides themselves.
Well, those guys in I mean, they were like cheap help. The guys in Ireland. I mean,
Well, they were, because they were, but I did. I went over and did some consulting with them. I went to train their people. I worked in Ireland for 3 months.
Yeah.
But what I found is they were capable of doing all sorts of stuff, but the problem was they were on such tight deadlines, and they had quotas, so that when I went over there and started training them, they started doing some really nice stuff. And then the bosses came up to me and said, "Steve, stop teaching them. So we got to crank them out." But they did a couple of beautiful issues, and one of the things I'm going to show on Under the Line Art is some of the difference when they had the time. But think about this, Brian. I don't know what your output per day on pages is, but at Oli Optics, if I got 2 pages of Spawn out of any of my separators, I thought that was a good day. Sometimes, because we would do hundreds and hundreds of, polygons, which is how we did it, and it was just to layer up the colors. It would take a long time to get that look.
Yeah.
In Ireland, these guys had quotas between 6 and 8 pages a day.
Yeah, that's not fun.
So they had to crank. That's fast.
Yeah.
So that there was no way they could put the time and energy into it, and I felt bad for them because they were really quite talented. So how about go back and see if we've got more Spawn Batman here. Well, actually, no,
I don't think that's Spawn.
Avengers Forever. I wanted to come.
That's a Blade.
Huh?
That's a Blade, right?
No, I know it is. No, yeah. Well, I'm back now. This is one of my favorites. This is from the alternate cover to issue #1 of Avengers Forever. But see, on these, another thing that I think I was one of the only color guide artists who used an airbrush consistently.
I don't see that one up, Steve, that you were just talking about. Is it up?
This
green got low.
The Conqueror.
What
do you see now?
I see the Blade.
This Kang the Conqueror.
Oh, now you go. Yeah. Now I do. Yeah, that looks nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Now this was some sweet stuff. And then I was able to just do these kind of different effects in the background for airbrush and what. Here's the one thing that was kind of. Let me see if I can show you the Avengers Forever. There were 2 different. What I tried to do with alternate covers. Let's see. Was I'm looking for the other. Oh, here we go. That was the alternate cover. Now this was the main cover, and what I tried as far as color goes, on this one, if I tried to detail all of those Marvel characters back there, this page would be chaos. So what I tried to do is make a real color separation just if we're getting into the color theory part of things, deciding when you do knockouts, when you set up your planes so that your eye can see what's actually going on. Yeah. And so here I did Rick Jones in complete full color, and then all the major Marvel characters in knockouts. And then just because that you need to do these little things, I put a little spot of red on his tennis shoes and on his Hot Tuna t-shirt. It's kind of like, that's a thing that Brian might have talked to you guys about, what I call color surprise. Brian, have you told them about the Merlin E. Nabnett book where I got the mother color idea?
No, I just told them about mother color.
Okay, well, where the mother color came from is a 1960s Walter Foster art book that my mom had, My mom was an artist, but she wasn't very good with color. One day I came home and she did these paintings that were fabulous. And I went, wow, Mom, what happened? And she showed me, well, I got this book. And it's called Color with Palette, Knife, and Brush by Merlin E. Nabnett, the Color Wizard. And within it,
was that actually his title, The Color Wizard?
Yes, that's what they call it. It's right there. And then he had these 5 color principles, about color surprise, gray to rest the eye, transitions of color, warm to cool, and balancing things, and then had the concept of the mother color. And I actually based 90% of my comic book coloring career on what I learned from that one book. And you can still find it on eBay sometime.
What's his name? What was the name again?
It's called Color with Palette, Knife, and Brush. It's one of those old, big, thin, 32-page Walter Foster books. But it's like, but his color, what he does, he would set up the mother color so it would be a mixture of darks but not black. So you'd get this nice rich tone, and then he would that he could blend out of, and then he would hit spots of pure color on top of that. And that he called it color surprise. And I call it in comic book industry pop.
Yeah.
Because that's what comic books is all about, man. It's gotta pop. It's gotta have balls. It's gotta have some energy. It's gotta be because that's what comic books are all about. So his concepts work perfectly for comic books.
Well, I'm gonna try and find that. Steve, we're at the end of our hour. I just want to say thank you so much for being our guest tonight. It was a real treat.
Well, thank you, man. It's been fun. That hour went really fast. I appreciate it. And if anybody wants to check out what I'm doing on Facebook, I'll be doing it. I'm going to check out what you're doing because it sounds like you're doing an interesting website thing too.
Yeah, Steve Oliff. So check him out on Facebook before he gets 5,000 friends and he can't accept your friendship, okay? All right. Thanks, Steve. Good night.
Thanks, Brian. Good night.